all. Welcome to our September 30th public call. We're going to be going through a kickoff of our IPV and stress goals and interventions work, doing some end-to-end review work on social connection, elder abuse, and our demographics for goals and interventions, and have a fair bit of announcements. I'm Sarah DeSilvi, Director of Informatics at the Gravity Project. Next slide, please. As always, we always mute everybody upon entry to the meeting, just because of the large number. So although we're at 30 now, it usually rises to around 100 or so folks within the next minutes or so. We ask that you remain muted to avoid background noise during the call. All of our calls are recorded, and they're available within a library of previous calls on the Gravity Confluence page. As you should be aware, we do try really hard to integrate any kind of thoughts that are going on in the chat. Just a couple chat requests. So if it's regarding a topic that is not currently being covered, do try to hold that for out of meeting, like get contacts, and then try to hold that for out of meeting conversation if it's seeming to distract from the conversation we're having about the meeting. And then all comments should be sent to everybody, so that we can collectively join in. And then just be aware that if you send it directly to me, I will likely read it out loud, because things are happening too fast usually for me to discern what's from my own viewing and what's public consumption. So you can send me an email after the fact. Next slide, please. This is our standard antitrust practices announcement. Next slide. We do always invite everybody on the call or any other colleagues to officially join the project. There is a page on the Confluence regarding that. You're going to see the links that we mentioned pop into the chat box as we talk about them. If you want to check whether you've already signed up or if others from your org have signed up, you can review the existing membership at the second link. And then again, the Gravity Project is just a really humongous, the Confluence page is just a humongous source of information about all of our different initiatives, and you can find that at that last link. Next slide, please. A specific thank you to our founders, grantors, and in-kind supporters. This list grows. We are very, very grateful for all of the labor and financial support that our friends offer us. Next slide, please. If you wish to sponsor, you can email gravityproject@emiadvisors.net and find information about sponsoring in the sponsorship page of the app of the Confluence. Next slide, please. I'm going to go through some brief announcements. It says Sarah, but it's likely going to involve a little bit of all hands on deck. We have some introductions to make, some formal introductions. I'm going to go through all the terminology work. Bob will give a tech update. There is no policy update today because Mark presented on all the exciting policy updates at the last meeting, and then we'll close with community homework and next steps. Next slide, please. Announcements, next slide. This is a whole bunch of things. I believe Evelyn is on the call to assist with some of these, but so we always try to announce the SDOH Fire IG public meetings from Wednesdays from 3 to 4 EST. All are invited, and the meetings are available through the HL7 meeting calendar. There are some new reports we always try to drop in. Again, any of the further information on any of this is available in specific on the announcements page on the Confluence. We wanted to elevate again a really helpful paper from one of our colleagues on the new IC10CM release. We helped them write it, healthify, and it's a pretty great overview. Evelyn, are you on the call to talk about the eHealth Exchange? Yeah. Okay, great.
Thanks. So actually here we want to highlight two opportunities, funding opportunities. So we often get asked, if there's funding available to support related work. So we want to bring to your attention, although it's due tomorrow, eHealth Exchange has innovation grants open, 100,000 each. Your intent to apply is due tomorrow. This is to demonstrate the use of FIRE. So for those on the call that are interested in testing, implementing the Gravity FIRE IG, here's an opportunity for you to use available funding and apply for available funding. The second funding opportunity is Amazon. Amazon Web Services has a new grant. They're issuing a lot of funding out. Global program to help customers develop cloud solutions to advanced health equity. So applications are due November 15th. This is global, but of course, US can apply as well. So opportunities again to talk about your technologies if you are, or technology-based projects. We had also announced last time that ANSI has stood up a new information exchange for human services consensus body. A webinar is scheduled for October 6th. So for those interested, I know we have some members on our community here that are also part of that. This is a consensus-based body, so it's really not that they're looking at reusing existing standards. It's really, my understanding, a community of practice for those interested in implementing SDOH standards, and it's beyond HL7 standards, but very important because we need to tie all around. So that's it for the, and not sure if there's any questions, just reach out to me. Thanks, Sarah.
Hey, Evelyn, this is Bob.
Yes.
Yes. Hi. Yeah.
The ANSI Information Exchange, isn't that a direct trust effort, not ANSI?
Yes, it is, Bob. Thank you. That's exactly right.
I think it's a little misleading because ANSI is not holding that. Direct Trust is an ANSI accredited organization, but it's not ANSI doing it.
Yeah,
Yes.
Thank you, Bob, for the clarification. Yeah, it is Direct Trust leading it, but Direct Trust being ANSI, ANSI accredited.
Well, so is HL7 ANSI. A number of organizations are ANSI. I just want to be clear that ANSI is not leading something. It's Direct Trust, much like it would be HL7. I think that we need to make it clear for our community.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. And by the way, the date for that first information session has changed. It's not October 6th. The powers that be created that date, not realizing it was going to conflict with our Gravity Project patient care IG meeting. It's been rescheduled to October 14th at 12 noon Eastern time.
Thank you, Brian.
The link is in the chat.
Thank you. We'll make the updates on our Gravity Confluence page.
Any more comments on the announcements? All right. Thank you for it's great to have our friends on the call to help us get things right, as our friends always do. Next slide, please. Introductions. Next slide. I get to pass the mic. Here, Dan. Take it away, Dan.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
Coming in loud and clear.
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Hello, everyone. My name is Dan Freeman. I am really excited to be joining all of you in a new role as technical director. I wanted to share just a little bit with you all about who I am, why I'm here. And if you go to the next slide, I have had the great privilege of working with many of you before, but not all of you. And so I thought I'd share just a few words so you have a little bit of understanding of my background and context. I am a physical therapist by sort of clinical training and an informatician by profession, which is a little bit of an unusual conversation or combination. I, for quite a long time, led the lung terminology at Regenstrief. And in my current role at RTI, I work on a variety of projects and give advice around data standards and interoperability. Through that experience, I've had the privilege of working with, I think, all of the members of the PMO in various ways. Evelyn and Bob and Linnell on a variety of things at HL7, Sarah in the terminology work as I was at Loink, and more recently with Mark as we were, I guess, co-conspirators on the USCDI task force. And it's a real exciting time for me to partner with you in leading a open community, developing the technical specifications that help make it possible for systems to share and understand each other as they pass along this information. Although we don't get a chance to meet very often in person, if we ever have that opportunity at some point in the future and are looking for a conversation starter, you can ask me about one of my side projects or interests known as the Pocket Square project. But I wanted to share just kind of two main aspects of how I'm thinking about and want to approach our ongoing work building out technical specifications. And if you move to the next slide, the first thing I wanted to sort of share with you is that from my background as a physical therapist, when I speak of and use the word health, in my mind, I'm really sort of anchoring that understanding on WHO's understanding and definition, which includes sort of physical and mental and social well-being all wrapped into one. And so one of the helpful frameworks that has kind of been part of my my approach has been WHO's International Classification of Functioning, Disability, and Health. This is the sort of interaction diagram that you see here. And this is more or less the sort of preeminent biopsychosocial model for how folks think about functioning. And I think it helps illustrate this sort of complex notion of the interactions at so many different levels, which is really why the work of the Gravity Project is so exciting. But in this model, you see sort of these complex interactions where a person's experience of a health condition is really related to a variety of different things, including body functions and structures, whether there are impairments or limitations in those or not, which influences and interacts with their ability to engage in certain activities, which might be things like walking or performing instrumental activities of daily living and so forth, as well as their roles and participation in their roles within society. And all of those things have contributing factors, both individual as well as social and environmental factors. And so while I sort of approach, and have been sort of brought up in sort of the clinical training side, this model of thinking about health and structures is really kind of the backbone of the way I think about representing health information. But of course, most of my time has been focused on the challenge of the sort of fundamental problem of getting the right information at the right place and in the right time and format. And while computers are amazing, they are totally limited in their ability to help people by the scope of information that's available to them and whether or not they can actually understand that. And that was sort of the genesis of my beginning interest in data standards and interoperability, was trying to make progress on that project, that problem. And so if I had to summarize kind of in one word, the overall approach that we used at Loink, if you want to go to the next slide, it was simply that this is a community effort. And so this graphic is one I would use sometimes in Loink presentations to convey the idea that interoperability is fundamentally a problem or a challenge about humans who are working together to help make their information systems be able to share data and understand them. But without recognizing that the technology solutions are part of a complex ecosystem, it doesn't work. And they're one part of the overall puzzle. But I wanted to share just a little bit more about the ways in which kind of our shared vision, that is, when I say we, I say the Gravity Project community, all of you, as well as the kinds of work that we were doing at Loink, really have a common ethos. And on the next slide, I don't know if it's possible to pop over to this website, or I can do it if I don't, it doesn't appear that I have share powers yet. But on this slide, fantastic, now I do. Let me see if I can make this magic work. Are you all seeing my screen?
Yeah, Dan.
Okay, so this was the culmination of a lot of conversation and deliberation about how we wanted to approach our work of standards development at Loink. And it might be useful for you all to sort of reflect on what parts resonate with where we want to go as a community here working on the Gravity Project. We were motivated by a vision where people were experiencing optimal health in that broad sense that I described to you earlier, supported by information systems that really worked seamlessly together. And to do that, we were developing open data standards that allowed health data to move seamlessly across those information systems. And we wanted to do that work in a way that made it with as few barriers as possible, because standards are more valuable when more people use them, right? If you're the only person on the planet who has a telephone, it isn't super useful. But when the majority of people have phones, suddenly that piece of technology becomes a lot more valuable and useful to you. And the same thing is true with the technical specs and vocabularies that we are developing here. But we're we wanted to be very open and sort of humble in our approach, recognizing that what we know today isn't the end of the story, and we wanted to constantly learn and apply a learning mindset to everything that we did, whether that was the way in which we built the data standards, but also the way that we tried to cultivate and facilitate a community of practice. And so learning was really sort of our driving principle. But we also wanted to be intentional about the kinds of behaviors and attitudes and approaches we took as we were creating these technical standards. And I wanted to just kind of walk through a few of them with you today, just so you have some understanding of, where is this guy coming from? What does he think about, this standards development process? And so, of course, openness was one of the sort of principal factors. We used open development practices, and we really wanted to foster a diverse and welcoming community, because this was essential to producing the best solutions for interoperability. We also, wanted to call out a principle of respect, trying to do right by others, being considerate of different viewpoints and experiences. And this is where a governance model comes into play, recognizing that we didn't want any one interest to be able to dominate the conversation, and recognizing that we were going to be successful only so far as we considered a wide range of perspectives and recognized that progress was built from the contributions of many. This next one, this principle of accessibility, is one that I'd also like you to give some thought to. Open standards are really a fundamental global good. In the FHIR community, you'll often hear Graham and others talk about building public treasure. The word that we use, or the term that we use, were global good. And because of that, this contribution where all of us are contributing to a common foundation, we wanted to make the principle of accessibility sort of central. We wanted those standards to be accessible to everyone, not limited by geography, nor nationality, or socioeconomic status, or any other kind of boundary, really. And so to that end, we really tried to make both the community as well as the standards in our modes of communication clear, royalty-free, and approachable to everyone. this is a tall order. And of course, these are sort of ideal statements, and we didn't always live up to it, nor do I think does any community sort of fully live up to it. But we might give some additional thought to how might we make our work more accessible. We recognize an additional principle of growth, meaning we knew that we needed to continue to progress. We didn't want to rest on our laurels, but to seek to improve as knowledge advanced and technology advanced. We tried to balance rigorous methodology with a pragmatic approach, because we really wanted to understand the ways in which standards got used, and we didn't want to have development processes that really hindered that. Observing that in a lot of cases, sort of some traditional standards development processes at the end produce things that are, my words were, impenetrable, abstract, overly complicated, and ultimately not actually very useful. And so when push comes to shove, we try to balance useful over theoretically perfect, and therefore are guided by empiric analysis and observation and implementer feedback. This last principle, or the second to last principle of agility, was something that is maybe surprising if you think about standards development. You might not think of standards as being agile, but the point was our processes were meant to be nimble, so that we stayed sort of close to the ground truth. Some standards development processes are so slow that by the time you're done producing it, the world has completely moved on. So we wanted to have enough agility that we could not have ossification or decision paralysis, and move quickly as we learn, keeping these long-term benefits of progress in mind. But of course, all of that is balanced by this idea of diligence, meaning applying rigorous approaches, being grounded in evidence, holding ourselves to a high standard for consideration. We for sure want to avoid haphazard changes that cause a lot of pain and angst for implementers. So we balance both the pragmatic and the agile perspectives together with an equal commitment to understanding the ramifications of change, and incorporating a wide range of expert counsel. So in that, we try to thread that needle between practical and not ivory tower wishful thinking. So I hope that gives you some sense of, where is Dan coming from? How does he think about standards development? I'm so excited to be building on the groundbreaking and novel foundation that you all have been working on for these past couple of years. And I look forward to working with all of you as we continue to advance the technical side of the Gravity project. Thanks so much.
Dan, thank you so much. So I do want to state for everyone, so one of the things I sent to Dan, which of course we didn't have time to review before he presented today, was how it was interesting to merge those principles, which are really about principles about intention, and well, they're about implementation as well, but there's a lot about behavior, right? There's a lot about how our process of how we work together with the principles that we created as a collective, now going on 2 years ago, which do include, I think, the concept of implicit bias. And so merging Dan's history into the existing principles and work at the Gravity Project just feels like such an amazing boon. And Dan, we are so grateful, grateful to work with you. And so I'm just honored as well.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. All right. I feel like I just went to class and it was really lovely. And now I have to think again. I have to put my steering the ship hat back on after just listening really intently. So next slide, please. All right, so here we are at the end of September. There's some work done that we need to do to wrap up our goals and interventions work across the domains we've been covering since August. And then the work on the technical work plugs along. And then you can see the SDOH pilots are still in the pipeline as work to come. Next slide, please. Any questions on what's been presented so far? All right, I'm going to go into next slide, please. Terminology, there's a lot to cover here. You'll see that in the next slides, because terminology is working across multiple different fronts at once, I'm trying to structure the presentation according to that little diagram we have where we both do identification, we do end-to-end review, and we do build, right? And then we also do implementation and evaluation, and then there's that feedback loop. You'll see that little visual in a second. I'm going to go into some build updates first, and then we'll go into that identification phase work next. So next slide, please. Yes, Bob, I think that's a really good point. It's one of the reasons for including social care terminologies. Yeah, and truth is that humans are the sum of all of it. What happens, we do speak within the Gravity Project as the constant is that there is no limit to the human's experience. It happens in the clinical settings, it happens in the community setting. So the boundaries that we create can be easily dissolved when you consider the people we are intending to care for. So I'm going to also describe some naming conventions regarding ICD-10-CM. So even though we submitted an initial application all at once, the release of the codes is really phased out across this year and then next year. So in our naming conventions, you'll see 2021 codes and 2022 codes. So just a reminder that these are the codes that are released into the ecosystem starting tomorrow. So we have that code for inadequate drinking water supply, food insecurity, homelessness and its subtypes, and housing instability and its subtypes. I really can't be more grateful for all of your collaboration. I think it's just starting to hit home to many of our users out there that these terms are going to be available, and specifically within the COVID use case, as we've been discussing, they're so critical. And I think we might be accustomed to these things right by now, but the amount of appreciation I'm sensing in the ecosystem for these terms at this time cannot be underestimated. So I just want to thank everybody for their work to get us here. Next slide, please.
Sarah?
Oh, yes. Hi.
Sarah, I just want to add that changing language in this codified manner is an astounding accomplishment.
Yeah, I know it's funny. I think it becomes normative a bit inside this group, and then because of the release, Lucy, I'm feeling what people who have not been inside the group feel about it recently over the last few
Right.
days, and it's very profound. So
Exactly.
yeah, I agree.
We
Sarah,
shouldn't estimate either how much work went into this, how much wonderful, skilled, expert politicking went into getting this done, and hopefully the impact on real world reporting and recording and action will be equivalent to the work that went into this. It's really amazing.
yes,
Just wanted
Sarah,
to emphasize.
just to back up Lucy's point, Sarah, this is Mike Klinkman. I'll give an anecdote from Michigan. We've been running a monthly to every other month meeting of the provider organizations and the major payers in Michigan. And it's been stuck for a long time on trying to incentivize providers to do social screening. But what's happening now is I'm being asked frequently by one health system or one provider organization or another about what's happening with the ICD changes. So I had a back and forth last week with one of the major insurance companies in Michigan, where I could explain to them what was coming in October, what was likely coming down the pike in the next round, in the slide you're showing now. And I think it's allowing us finally to start to get some alignment and some slowdown in the payers side in waiting for consensus before they just push on ahead to do stuff that may not be as interoperable as they think. So it's a major accomplishment, and being able to turn to Gravity to say, here's what's happening nationally. Here are the standards that are being balloted and released. Let's all slow down. That's been tremendously helpful to me.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in that the back and forth in one instance conveyed how swiftly this happened and how it enables, like how standardization basically just focuses all these disparate streams. So it's really a consolidation. I suppose it's like it's slow because it's organized. And yes, thank you. It's all very, very exciting. And I did want to mention to Gail that digital equity is in our parking lot for domains, and we're working with our executive committee on a process for that. And again, yes, of course, Lucy, and we are so grateful for everybody. So now I'm going to try to segue into 2022. Again, we have quite a huge agenda. This got presented at the September 14th meeting, as we discussed. There is agreement now between the VA and Gravity that the ICD-10-CM suggestion for merging those two codes is not sufficient. So we are formally advocating for breaking up those codes, and we'll have more information. Next slide, please. I wanted to show you all how to access everything we know about ICD-10-CM 2022 right now. So this will be available on the Confluence and in our emails, but if you want to review the proposal packet, it's on page 87 of that first link. If you want to view the September 15th presentation, there's that link there to the Zoom. There's the passcode, and it starts at timestamp 5610. That's when our SDOH presentation starts. And if you want to submit public comment, either for the general packet or specifically concerned regarding the VA element, or for the total packet and concern for the VA element, comments are due by November 15th, 2021, and the commenting process is really quite easy. It's just sending an email to nchsicd10cm@cdc.gov. Again, all of this will be available on the Confluence after the meeting, but we wanted to get this out to you as soon as possible. Just so we could, if organizations want to do formal comments to their organizations, that can happen. All right, next slide, please. Again, as always, this is again a build element, so you can expect very shortly these spreadsheets to include all of the code from the SNOMED release in September and the code from the ICD-10 release in tomorrow. So there's a lot of work to be done across these 4 domains, specifically on this screen for those built code final product-ish spreadsheets available through the Confluence. So the team will be very, very busy over the course of the next couple of weeks getting that done, as we do everything else. Does anybody know? Oh, so we do know folks at WHO, Lucy. Yes, we do, and I'd love to talk to you about that. There's a couple different avenues working with WHO, both with ICD-10-11 and with strategy that we can talk about at any time. I would love to know your thoughts. Maybe we'll do for a phone call.
Okay. Look forward to it. Thank you.
I love my Lucy phone calls. All right, next slide, please. Okay, and now we're going to go into identification. This is the meat of the terminology presentation, even though we've already covered a lot. There's a lot to go through. Updates in the naming conventions and terminology build. Terminology identification, again, not build, because we're trying to remain consistent with our processes here. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, next slide. All right, so here we are. This is our schedule of the next few weeks. You're going to see there's a little bit of a change. We have very excitedly a lot of engagement from the VA right now, trying to assist us with the ICD-10-CM submission and assist us with intervention work. And I want to thank John Bolster, who I met with yesterday. Sometimes you just need to talk to the right people, and John was enthusiastic support yesterday. So thanks, John. We actually connected via a chat during a gravity meeting. So I really want to appreciate his advocacy there. So we're going to be delaying slightly some of the domain vote for veterans, social connection, and elder abuse, really because we're trying to make sure we get the VA's and the DoD's eyes on the data sets, and because we are working really fast and furious with a lot of new program build for social connection and elder abuse. So we will be voting on educational attainment and employment next meeting. There are master lists on the Confluence. There are some subtle last minute changes, but there's elements that you can find there for education and employment. And then expect updates the next Tuesday release or so. We do try to keep them updated so you can have plenty of time to review. We'll talk about the review process going forward. So it's today we're doing general IPV and stress kickoff, doing some all domain review, and then next meeting will be the vote for unemployment and education, and then after that we'll do another vote and then keep on working on IPV and stress until we take a breath for the holidays. All right, next slide, please. Yes, yeah. So, Charles, so the truth is we found a really excellent pathway to Dr. Rose. All right. So this is the build. This is the terminology development process I was speaking of. So here we are doing some identification work. Next slide, please. Of course, yes. So we're going to, there's not much to cover here. This is IPV and stress, goals, and kickoff. Next slide, please. Really, we're going to focus a lot of our work on the review because we have a lot to cover. So the next month, just as we did with the other domains, we have to build out the goals and intervention concepts. For psychological stress and IPV, we again covered screening and diagnoses in the spring. So this is the wrap up of that work. Next slide, please. Again, the core of interventions are programs and professions. So you'll see a lot of these elements as we go forward with our build. We always take in consideration federal reporting requirements and policy and those social service mappings and community taxonomy such as 211 LA. And then we drop them into our structure. Next slide, please. This is our, yes, hi.
Yeah, forgive me if I'm stuck in the past, but if you go to the previous couple of slides, you're talking about a lot of tasks that are going to be done. Is this group going to be talking about the language for interventions and goals, or is this going to be done, forgive the word, by staff, and then we are all expected to keep up on the Confluence website? How is this going to work?
This works similar to how it has worked in the past, is that there's a trifecta, right? So there's the staff, there's the subject matter experts, and then there's the community engagement. So you're going to see the community engagement slides over the next chunk, like the next 15 or so. Okay. Yeah, so there's a lot of review. The review slides that we're about to cover show a lot of, well, that's when we bring things to you, for example.
Okay.
But yeah, there's no deviation, and I apologize for the quick touch base for IPV, and because we separated out screening and diagnoses and goals and interventions, the formal why happened in March and April, right? The why does it matter, the evidence behind. Remember, Lisa James and Chris Grasso came and presented on IPV, and then we had Rana Cierno and the team from ACL present on elder abuse. So they might come and do guest statements, right? But as they have this fall already. But yeah, we build and bring to the community and have conversations. That's our process to leverage your insight. Next slide, please. Lucy, was that an okay answer?
Yes, fine, thank you.
Okay, next slide. All right, so IPV experts, they remain Chris Grasso and Lisa James. Next slide, please. And then Eric Prather, and we're gathering more friends for Dr. Prather. He's from the Stress Measurement Network. So even though it's just one, he really represents and is able to leverage the wisdom of that whole collective. Next slide, please. And we're going to quickly kind of go again, just for the sake of time, into so much content that we have to review. So Lucy, just brace yourself. Next slide, please. All right, so here's a review. Lots of things to show you all. Lots of changes and updates, and looking forward to having the conversation. Next slide, please. I want to remind everybody what we do in end-to-end review. It's kind of a final comprehensive assessment before we go into vote. The intent is to step back and consider the whole set and ask really critical questions. Are there missing concepts? Are there things incorrect that need to be changed? Are there concepts that are unnecessary and should be removed? These are the three critical elements, and the sets are available on the Confluence to facilitate this. For the sake of process, we really need any suggestions for comments and edits to be offered in written form with a rationale and evidence so that we can support it, because there was always a rationale and evidence for why it is the way it is. So just as we do with our formal voting, email us, send us an email and say, I think it should be different and this is why. And so anybody who's formally submitted any comment so far knows that we track it, log it, send it back. And you know, Tom, Paige, and I, we just went through this with his excellent suggestion regarding loneliness goals. So anytime there's a formal element, we just reply and then we're able to track it. So this is what the purpose of end-to-end review is. We're going to be going through a lot of content. And if you desire to make any edits or any suggestions, you can just do that formally through written email. We talk now, but formal requests for changes should come written via email. Next slide, please. I just want to remind everybody about the intervention structure that we have at present, because there are about to be some changes. Next slide. We wanted to acknowledge formally that there is a new intervention type. So that intervention type on the previous slide has been the anchor for about 2 years. We mentioned very briefly at our last meeting that in considering really the work of education and unemployment and the activities of really reaching goals specifically, we recognized a missing intervention of coaching. We again turned to AHRQ for a really compatible definition. That's where we turned to for our coordination definition so long ago. So you will see us wrestling with and considering how to implement coaching as an intervention type. We do want to state very clearly that coaching is different than education in definition and intent. So you can imagine both educating towards objectives, and you'll see that, but you also can coach towards goals. So this language will become part of our gravity approach, and we kind of, consider with each of our different domains. There also are new interventions that are really common across all the other domains, and that's, again, we mentioned this last time, assessment of communication barriers, coordination of resources to address social needs, and coordination of service provision. We are really formally looking out for a specific national definition of service provision. So if anybody wants to email us with a good idea on that, that would be very appreciated. We know it needs to happen. We just do have to give consensus definitions for anything we build, and we are awaiting one for that. We also have a few new programs that we will consider, again, across many of our different domains. You think about, this came up through one of our specific domains. I think we were working on elder abuse, but they really are applicable, of course, to homelessness and other different social risks we've talked about in the past. This is Community Paramedic Program and Mobile Crisis Unit. So these are all programs that will be that have consensus definitions, and you will see them on our definitions page, and you will see them integrated into our terminology. I do want to mention that when these general terms, we build them once and then we just drop them into all the sets. And you can imagine then them being built into value sets and VSAC as the end intent, right? So the big aha here is, as we encompass and address different domains, we have different programs, different kinds of interventions, and even different kinds of intervention types, because we're continuously trying to figure out how to do it better and do it comprehensively, I guess. Any questions on this page?
Yeah, Sarah, I do have a question. Could you talk about coaching and tell me who does it? How does a patient get to a coach? Does coaching refer only to what's done with an individual, or could it be a family? And who pays for it?
Okay, so coaching is done either by lay people or people with specific certification. And again, there will be a hyperlink to the AHRQ definitions on the Confluence. And again, I'm sorry, there's not a live hyperlink here. So you either have individuals like, care managers or social workers or diabetes educators coaching towards goals, right? Like a lot of the work that we do in our diabetes education is coaching, not just education. So they're not just testing for knowledge. They're really trying to facilitate attainment of goals. Or it can be, there's health coaches now too that have specific certification in coaching towards goals. And there also are specific CPT and HCPCS in the ecosystem now that reimburse for coaching specifically. Those CPT and HCPCS have been on our sets for actually some time. And the irony is, even though they were on our reimbursement intervention tab, we did not have terminology to represent that activity. So it was kind of a closing the loop. Lucy, did that answer your question sufficiently?
Thank you.
Yes, I hope. And then,
Oh, except for this is for a patient or for a family. Could it be for a family?
It absolutely could be. Yeah, right. Absolutely could be. Right.
So parent and children, or
Yeah, it could be
spouses who need to support each
caregiver
other, or
elder.
partners.
Yeah,
Okay.
100%. Whenever,
Okay.
yeah, because if we think again, and I think it's a little bit tricky because the current definition of education in SNOMED actually involves behavior change, but ideally in the definitions of pedagogy, you're educating towards knowledge, and you're coaching towards behavior, right? So it's a little bit tricky, but we did very clearly. It was very clear that this was a missing link. The specific, I'm just not teaching you, I'm actually doing this. So we call it out here. We did have a lot of conversation regarding the definition of education within SNOMED. Oh my Lord, we've had that. We're going to keep on fighting for that, I promise. I'm too long a professor who makes syllabuses with objectives to not desire that to be changed. So we're working on that front too. And then, Lucy, does that answer your question?
Yeah, so I'm trying to put therapy in this spectrum. Therapy works on the barriers to
Mhm.
becoming educated and reaching goals that coaches are trying to get you to.
Mhm.
Is that fair?
Well, I mean, I think oh Lordy. Okay, can you rephrase that statement? I'm trying to understand.
Okay, this is going to take too long. We can go offline about this, but
Okay, that's part of our
thank you for explaining about coaching.
Okay. And then Mike, I'm assuming that coordination is different than service provision itself. It depends on what, I mean, again, we've given space to this because it was identified within our intervention council, but we're waiting on that definition of service provision to really understand it, honestly.
Yeah, this is really critical for implementing stuff in communities because on the one hand, there are people who provide direct single services. There are others who may coordinate multiple service provision. It'd be good to know if there's a difference between resources to address social needs and service provision and what the technical definitions will be. Because this can get confusing. And if we're clear, it will help with implementation immensely.
So if you have perspective on this that you can, because again, this is like we're holding space for these terms. So if you want to help us with kind of parsing that out and we can send you the definitions as they come out of the IC, that'd be great.
Be happy to. Then we can just move on now.
It reminds me of all that work we went through spreadsheets with you and Tom so many years ago too.
Okay, that works fine, and yeah, and we can just do that offline too.
Okay,
Thanks.
that sounds wonderful. Any other questions? All right, next slide, please. And I do want to mention that we're actually having themes of interventions and goals that you'll see across all of our different work. So humans are complex. We are the sum total of many different needs, and oftentimes you address the primary risk by addressing a coordinate risk that's related. So we are developing sets of programs that, when applicable, you'll see on the master spreadsheets. And for the sake of the slides, we just say legal programs, right? But In all actuality, all those terms are built out on the spreadsheets. For example, we develop legal programs, medical like legal aid, medical legal partnership, you know, all of the different legal terms for housing because of eviction concerns, right? And contesting eviction. But many of those terms are pulled forward and incredibly appropriate within the elder abuse and intimate partner violence terms and the transportation insecurities. So if you're working on addressing the resumption or return of your driver's license, for example. Another example is housing programs. We develop them, of course, for housing, but they're applicable across elder abuse and intimate partner violence. If you remember, intimate partner violence or experience of violence was one of the different specific qualifications for determining yourself as homeless within HUD HMIS. So on the slide, you'll see housing programs, but in the sets, you'll see those programs called out in specific because we really we're developing this library, and it's not even like incredibly large, but developing a library of applicable social risk programs. And the great thing is they'll eventually be available as value sets that you can pull down through our value set work. Any questions there? Okay, next slide, please. All right, so on to some specific end-to-end review to prepare ourselves for the vote. We are going to go take the whole time today. Next slide. Trying to move. So we do have our goals for less than a high school education. Lucy, you can see I changed the title on the slide for you. The goal would be educated to a high school level or receive certificate of high school equivalency. These terms already exist in SNOMED. We are working on the completion of goals because, as we've talked about in the past, we don't just build the dream, we build the steps that you have to take to get there as measurable goals that are actionable and attainable. So these will be the completion of those other programs that are tied to it. So completion of basic skills program, completion of digital literacy program, completion of English as a second language program, for example. Wonderful. Thank you, Denise. All right. Does this make sense? I think it's fairly straightforward. You're going to see this repeated. Okay, next slide, please. For intervention, you have, great, hi Laura. You'll see these are the programs you really haven't changed: Adult Learning Center, Basic Skills Training, Digital Literacy, English as a Second Language, General Education Development Program, High School Completion Program, right? These terms, again, because employment and education are interrelated, they are shared largely across our high school education and unemployment domains. And these are all dropped into our intervention framework. Next slide, please. We did want to, this is again a new test, right? So one of the things we conceptualize is in our really robust and team-based settings. Sometimes this activity is of the education itself is happening in clinical settings, and sometimes it's happening in CBOs. So we wanted to build in really a new approach to education, which is not really new at all. We've always been educating about programs within our intervention framework, like education about SNAP, education about congregate meals, education about rapid reentry program, right? But what we realized as we addressed education, we actually had to build an education that represented getting educated. So using the literature of pedagogy, again, pulling out all of my old tricks out of my sleeve. So we have just basic terms, incredibly basic, that align with the objectives of each of those different programs. So education toward basic skills training, learning objectives, right?
Hey, Sarah.
Yeah?
This is Matt from Note2. Do we have an ICD-10 code for none of the above, just less than high school education, just so we can, from a social determinants of health perspective, identify those folks?
Do we have an ICD-10 code for
none of the above, right? Like no high school education, somebody that dropped out and may need some help?
We have other education concerns such as literacy concerns and the full robust. I think, yeah, there are definitely other terms regarding education in ICD-10-CM. We built this term to specifically represent the risk of less than a high school education, which wasn't represented yet. because it's a specific risk in the lit. So this is filling a gap, but there's other codes out there.
That makes sense, and I'm just going to listen from here on out. But
No, don't just
want to
listen.
make sure that we're doing the right thing. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, there already are comprehensive terms in the ICD-10 CM.
Yep.
We can actually drop them into the chat, just because
Awesome.
all of
Thank
my
you.
hurting and they're not coming to mind. But this is again built to address a specific gap.
Okay, thank you, Sarah.
Okay. Do these codes make sense? Really? So this is actually the delivery of the education in line with the objectives of the program. It should make it's just basic pedagogy speak. And if you have any comments and you want to change them, VOTEC, I think that's an interesting idea. Thank you, Lolita. We love you, Lolita. So interesting. I think the thing is so Teresa, I'm gonna hem and haw on that one, because we do not have, I know Lolita always comes in the clutch. We love Lolita. So I'm putting that in the hopper, Teresa, so we can make sure that we consider VOTEC applications. Given that this is specifically high school education, so the elements of VOTEC that are aligned with high school education are certainly represented in this, because it would be equivalent to high school completion. However, not all VOTEC are high school oriented, so I'm just going to put that in the hopper for a second and then circle back around. Is that okay? Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, but again, our intent was not to represent all high school deficiencies, but again, this would qualify for 6th grade, right? Because again, this is still, you didn't meet high school education elements, right? Okay. Next slide.
Sarah?
Yes?
Maybe for the parking lot, I'm sure there are people who have completed high school and completed their GED and really want to move on. And for mental health and life goals, going to community college or junior college or college altogether might be really critical. Does that come in somewhere in our thinking? We don't have to elaborate about it the way you've done for the less than high school, but I'm wondering if higher educational aspirations is something that we should take account of in terminology.
We actually talked a lot about that in our intervention council. Again, this is our focus. I think that should go in the parking lot as like a future domain, because specifically this was focused on high school, but we talked a lot about underemployment and need for additional training, such as associate's degrees or advanced education. We've talked a fair bit about that, and I think I want to hold space for that as well.
Let's call it lifetime aspiration.
I love that. That sounds great.
So there might be more involved than education. And when we've finished with all the general basic stuff, sometime in the next year or two, maybe we go on to
it's concentric rings.
Aspiration.
Yes,
Thank you.
I know. It's almost like it's like the Erickson's, or
Maslow's.
There we go.
Maslow's. We're just gonna move up Maslow's.
Yes, exactly. I'm sorry. I'm mixing my developmental psychology, but yes, exactly. Okay, so that was education, and there's a lot of things that came up from that. I think Hasna, it's nice to see you. Lucy does, and then, So Matt, can you help us understand what you're talking about here? So interventions.
So truancy is ICD-10 code.
Correct.
That's more of what about an intervention associated with that, which could be an issue identified related to any kind of educational, right?
So truancy applies when you're still within the high school pipeline and not expected to have graduated, correct?
Right.
Yes, so it's a little bit different than this use case, which is expected. You are of an age where you would have expected to be graduated, and you are not, right?
Sorry, I changing the topic,
No, I love it though. But I think that that's this again, like Lucy was aiming beyond high school. We also equally can turn our lens to, I mean,
I mean,
I'm sorry, I take care of a lot of teachers, and I just spent the week talking to teachers who are having a really hard time, right, in clinic. So addressing the complexities of of maintaining engagement in school is a really important thing culturally. And Matt, I honor that you brought that up.
well,
And I think we just as Lucy aims us beyond high school, I think it's important to consider turning the lens back in as well. So thank you for bringing that forward.
I mean, even with maybe there's not a code for adult truancy, but I know that completion rates for like associate degree programs and other those types of programs are really low in that truancy and is oftentimes related to other social determinants.
Yeah.
And so, anyways,
That's where the coaching element actually comes in, right? That's when you facilitate engagement is when is with coaching. So hopefully we'll wrap ourselves around it. Thank you, Matt. All right. Any other questions regarding education? Hi. Yes.
Hi, Sarah. It's Monique. One thing to keep in mind, and I know you're exploring the children terms for employed. I'll just note that to most of us, employed means, that you're getting paid for your work. And unfortunately, SNOMED has started to introduce unpaid forms of employment, underemployed, and there is an in paid employment term, which may be the goal that we're actually looking for here that we'll have to think about, but just bringing it up.
We were all of those things, and I actually was thinking about you, Monique, when I put that little exploring in children terms in there, because that's the world where we've been over the last couple of weeks, and really trying to figure out, the definition of employment, according to the census, the federal definition that we've been basing on actually doesn't mandate that you be paid, so it's a little tricky, right? So we defined employment according to the feds. Which allows you to be unpaid but employed if you're working in your family's restaurant, for example.
Unpaid internships.
Yeah, so all of that is contained in the definition of employed that we currently reference, and Monique, we really have to look at those terms that are in SNOMED and try to figure out how to align them correct.
Because I think that otherwise we'll get into the situation where someone can be employed and that's documented, but they're not getting any money, and that may not be solving the problem.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would just throw out, I think internships are one component of that. Also, community service. Those would be potentially activities where high school age or younger is building skills that might be applicable to employment, but without being compensated monetarily.
I don't know if that's currently within, again, our current definition is federally aligned, right? And there is I think there's underemployed, right, as a concept, which represents when you might you might be employed, but you're not employed as much as you need. So maybe we'll keep that in the hopper. This is Lucy. This is why we do this. We do this together. Because underinsurance and underemployed are very, okay, I'm just, I'm putting this down. I'm writing it on a piece of paper because I'm old school. Okay. Any other thoughts here?
As long as we're talking about unpaid, especially for older people, volunteerism becomes quite important. And if they're too isolated or beginning to mentally disintegrate, then volunteering, I know, is often suggested as a way to get out of the house and keep your mind going. So just the general idea of volunteering, not related to building your resume or seeking employment eventually, but just being a good citizen in the community, and trying to locate people where they can contribute skills they already have, but mostly make sure that they are interacting with somebody sometimes.
So that crosses over with our social connection programs you'll see very shortly. Yeah. And then I really want to thank Holly. you know, we are the amazing community. I say underemployed. Holly comes up with exactly the definition that aligns with the conversation. Again, pro bono engagement would not necessarily, we do base the definition we have for employment is according to federal specifications. That's how we've bound ourselves in. There is some real estate in there we can explore, but there's some things which are out of scope. Pro bono engagement would not be qualified as employed, usually, according to the definition. And under the table employment would be qualified as under this definition. However, I don't know if it's called out because there certainly are different risks within being employed in that way. And I will put that under here as well. Okay.
Yeah, I think
Sarah,
that's an
quick question.
important
How would we
distinction
address,
to be able, sorry. I think that's an important distinction to be able to make.
Correct.
Is gainfully employed, but not legally employed.
Correct, Holly. I think that's really important. Thank you.
And this is Tom, another question, with somebody who is required to do either some level of employment or community service in order to receive public benefits,
Can you
would we
repeat
consider
that?
that employment, or would we consider that something else?
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry, the statement.
Sure. So
It's
if an individual, if an individual is required to engage in so many hours of employment or community service in order to receive public benefits, how do we integrate that into these codes? I mean, if they're required to do community service in order to receive payment from the government, is that employment? They're being compensated and they're required to do it.
We'll have to go to the definition again. We have to be careful to solve for the within the bounds of the definition we have right now, and I think it actually might apply. I do want to state that self-employed is included in this employed, and it's one of the children that we're exploring. So that comment is taken in there. Freelance is included in there. This is why there's exploring children terms ... is because there's a lot of real estate underneath employed that we are working on. Mark specifies 1099s and consultants. That's all employment. And again, those subtypes in the employed is like the macro term under which there's lots of different children. And some of that unpaid labor that Monique was talking about before, they're actually U.S. extension specific terms that we will we'll bring back and put in the hopper. Again, I think any other questions here? Again, we do have the completion of programs codes here. So Denise is saying that some interns and volunteers are considered as employed perfect. And so there might be cases where this meets criteria. Again, I'm just referencing the definition according to the feds that we base our definition on. Any other thoughts here? Lots of things to consider. Underemployment, under the table employment and the risk it carries. We do represent, this does include self-employment and freelance work and consulting as it's stated right now. And within certain cases, it might even cover obligational internships and volunteering. So at this point, I do not think it's within our use. I think we really have been covering and narrowing along the whole way as like I have a job and I don't have a job, or I don't have enough jobs. So so multiple jobs and the capacity conversation, we haven't necessarily addressed in this, but I think it's almost a different total domain. Like I have a job, but they're all at $7.50 an hour, so I have to work 3 of them. These are the people I take care of every day. If they go from working at the dollar store to Dunkin' Donuts 2 days, like 2 different shifts back to back, and then they finally go home to their kids.
This is Evelyn. One thing to just think about here is as we look at the work going on with Missouri, that they currently have an ONC LEAP grant. they've been testing unemployment, well, goals with employment based on their 1915C waiver program. And some of their goals are related to the person-centered plan, where they have to retain employment. So the goals are starting to be like retain employment. The goal is that I have employment for 6 months. So some of those they're being drafted and tested with the case management systems. Again, the lack of codes is evident, but just something to think through, that they're also targeting it from a value-based payment perspective to keep the person employed for a certain amount of time.
And I do want to state that what we undertook to represent was the first stage of having a job or not having a job. There's all kinds of different references you can apply, including underemployment. I did want to specify that we imagine migrant status as a whole separate domain, but you would qualify as being employed within this framework. And that's, we have migrant in our hopper. And John is thinking it's useful to think of this through and test minimal viable terms where you can add dimensions and items, correct? I do feel like underemployment is a specific concern within employed, not employed. It's almost like a halfway step. We did build has and employment benefits as a goal, because that would be a plateau goal. Maybe you don't have a job, but you have been connected to unemployment benefits, and that was one of our interventions. Housework does not qualify as employed. Though, Mark, thank you for the feminist or not even just feminist, a human-centered perspective, because all genders are doing unpaid labor to support home activities. Okay.
Sarah,
yes.
I'll add one more thing. The definition on the government site is, you're employed if you have a job, but they do kind of go into detail about what a job is and whether it's paid or not. They say they're employed if they did any work at all for pay or profit. So I think we may have to refine or, be clear on these definitions, because it's for a different purpose at the US site than, fulfillment, meaning I'm doing something to make myself feel fulfilled. I don't know that that's what their intent is. We'll have to look closely.
That was not the intent, for sure. Because some of the situations they describe as employment are hardly sufficient. But I do call to mind that you can imagine, and I think I think in the problem statement, which is not having a job, unemployment, there's probably some room to consider it, but there's also maybe just even the underemployment statement, moving from underemployment to happily employed could be imagined as a goal as well, or like adequately employed. We do adequate statements in other different domains. We did not do one here, right? Which is not just that something exists, but it exists in ways that are fulfilling and sufficient. So it might be really just what we've done in the past to consider applying that lens here as well. So not just do I have food, but is it of sufficient quality and quantity and quality? Okay, I'm going to put that in the hopper within goals specifically. All right.
Sarah, didn't we have a social determinant called economic insecurity long
We did
ago?
financial insecurity. Yep.
Yeah, a lot of what we've been talking about, gradations of that and efforts to fix that and requirements to change that. A lot of what we've been talking about today seems to me to come under that financial insecurity. What is the word? Region, domain, whatever.
There's a Venn diagram where they overlap, but they're not exactly the same thing. Yeah.
Okay.
I think you're right, though. It's almost like financial security drives the kinds of situations we're talking about, right? It's directly related.
Certainly can, yes.
Again, I want to be careful. So there's lots of ideas, but I need to know what to do with some of them. So if you have an idea specifically about how this needs to be changed, like so far the things I see are either included or not included in the employed statement. So I just need to know what, again, home workers, nannies, housekeepers would all be included in employment. So that's, any other questions on unemployment on this slide? Okay, I'm going to try to get through. Oh my gosh, it's 5:14. Next slide, please.
Sarah, this is Mark. Can I just throw out that it's a little strange to say that if you bring somebody else into the house to do the housework, it's employment. But if somebody's doing the housework within the house, it's not employment. Not trying to solve this right here, but just flagging the question.
It's a culturally weird thing, but it is in line with the definition.
It's weird across the whole. You mentioned gender before, and that's exactly right. Anyway, thank you.
So it has been, Mark, for at least 2 centuries, maybe two millennia.
Yeah,
Two millennia.
Yeah, we can talk about
Exactly.
slaves. Yeah, we can go on forever. I mean, this is ever since.
Yeah, that was a big can of worms he just
I
opened
know.
there. Leave it in the corner.
Yeah.
No, we're not going to leave it in the corner. We're going to look at it, but we're going to say yes, and then yeah. But I think it's noted. Okay, is it okay to go on to just some interventions, because this is kind of critical, because this is all on there. One of the things that we really do try to do is build off of approaches that are aligned with policies. So you can see job centers on here, and then the kind of like, we're doing a little bit of word refinement, but there really are 4 different types of activities that we know happen at job centers. Activities that focus on getting people jobs, so employment programs. Activities that focus on training specifically, so these are training programs. Activities that focus on developing work readiness, so these are work readiness programs, and we just dropped in workforce in front of each one just to put space there, but we will likely pull it away once in the refinement, because we think work readiness is sufficient. You don't need workforce, work readiness maybe. And then supportive services, so these are all the ancillary services that need to happen, and these are the 4 different kinds of activities that happen at different job centers aligned with federal policy. And then you can see again, basic skills training comes in there. There are many aligned kind of systems interventions we wanted to give space for if you look at the literature. So sometimes many different health systems are aligning with employers to do workforce development. So this is employer focused. We're just putting this here for reference. There's workforce transition programs when you're moving from a incarcerated state into a community state, or you're moving from, transitioning from school into the workforce. So anytime you're moving from one different identity into a different identity, there are specific programs that focus on transitioning. Unemployment insurance is here, voc rehab is here, legal aid specifically focused on unemployment is here, and fair employment programs are here. We did build space for adult and child care services because sometimes the key thing in order to enable a job is having someone have their dependent person, whether it be their adult sibling or parent or their child, have child care. So we built that in there. Because we have adult and child care services, we realized we didn't need dependent, because or at least we're testing that we don't need it, because you usually fall into one of these 2 different types. And then we pulled in some of the terms from financial insecurity. Lucy, you can testify. We made that connection just as you did. And then there's a new program, not new, this one was on there as well, the Financial Insecurity Master, which is continuation of healthcare coverage. We just revised the name actually because this was a better term for it, aligned with federal definitions. Whew. So all of these things are on the Employment Intervention Program list. They're fairly straightforward. So is there a way to assign these ICD to the caregiver? Interesting, because a lot of what the AAP just submitted was a whole bunch of codes for the caregiver. I think from a pediatrics perspective, I'm a pediatric faculty at the U. We do not, you can imagine that being a technical solution, but right now these are really Well, you can intervene. You can refer for a caregiver within pediatric settings. So I imagine that could be done. But most of these were focused on the person.
Okay. Yeah, I know it's an issue when we were building out one of our assessments
Yeah,
because we needed
yeah.
to account for even the underemployment being the underemployment of the caregiver and not the pediatric patient,
And
because that directly impacts the pediatric
correct,
patient.
absolutely. Or the child's underemployment like influences the parents and vice versa. We actually have a lot of robust conversations regarding this within tech, and I'm really sorry. I'm just taking the whole time today. My group is looking at gaps in telehealth medical device literacy. I think oh, great, Charles, thank you. Any thoughts here? Yeah, so on the job training, so this is that would be included in most of the workforce training programs. They actually don't happen at the job center. They happen at the job, right? So and the idea is that this workforce training can be a plug and play to be whether it's you're hired directly into an apprenticeship, like you're apprenticing with a an electrician, or whether it's a formal program through a job center. Anything else? Okay, I'm going to try to keep on moving. Again, so these are the terms that you're going to be, the next 2 weeks, our job is to review them and give us feedback so we can come back and vote. Oh, sorry. Thanks, Bob. I'm just consuming everything. Thank you so much for being flexible. Good thing there was no policy update today. I'm so sorry, Mark. All right, carry on. Next slide here. Yes, correct. So correct, Hasna. So you're right. So this is the thing is we do try to build for site independent terms. So Hasna is just echoing what I was saying is really that training program can happen at the job center. It can happen at the job. It can happen, all kinds of different places. It would just be it would be the program for that type of activity. Thank you, Hasna. These are outdated. I haven't updated them yet, Lucy. I'm going to try to keep on going. Next slide, please. I do want to get to some updates on next slide. First of all, I want to give a shout out to Charles. Thank you, Charles. So Charles, our colleague at Firm, did a really amazing job connecting us with all kinds of different folks in the VA ecosystem who are going to help us review some of these terms. Again, these are on hold right now. So we do have a lot of leeway and a lot of interest from the VAs to really make sure this represents what they desire. But you can see there's some new people, Veteran Services Officer, Veteran Services Organization would be the program, and the VA office. And then all of the different types. So, again, I'm going to give credit, Charles, a lot of these came from you. So thank you so much for your engagement. And again, we're not moving on these for the vote in 2 weeks. This is just still in development because of wanting to make sure it gets many, many eyes on it from the VA and the DoD. But if you have any insight, just let us know. Next slide, please.
Sarah, just to be obstructionist.
Okay.
Could Charles comment, could you go back to the previous slide? Could Charles comment on what percentage of the VA target population is involved with these programs? Or is it like 50% or 10% or everybody gets a chance, or how? I'm really blown away by how many programs there are, and I'm just curious what percentage of the population needs this and takes advantage of them.
And Charles, if you don't feel comfortable answering that, Charles, are you able to answer that, do you think? Or do we need to circle back around? Did Charles drop off?
Sorry. Okay.
I think he's here, but there he is. Hi, Charles. Do you feel are you able to answer that question, or are you muted? So Lucy, what we'll do is make sure that question gets answered next time. We do have some time, but I think that's literally, we have so much interest from the VA right now trying to help us. So we'll circle back around and get that information to you.
Thank you.
Under the yeah. So under the Veteran Service Organization are programs such as the Veterans of Foreign Wars and all the different programs to support vets in your communities as well. Okay, next slide. He has a mic problem. Oh, poor Charles. Bob had that the other, or someone did the other day too. Thank you. Next slide. Quick reviewing social connection goals and interventions. Again, here are our SMEs. Next slide. Next slide. I just wanted to add, here's Tom Page's social context are satisfying and sufficient. Thank you, Tom. They loved it. They loved it. When you wow a whole bunch of internationally recognized social connections SMEs, just know it feels good. They were that sounds lovely.
I'll have to tell my mom.
I know, tell your mom. Okay. So Teresa's asking about VA education assistance programs. So we will ensure that we look at that from that lens. Again, I'm going to try to move forward only for the sake of time, but we'll make sure that that is included in the VA review. And then Matt, I see you as the EFM&P program as well. Next slide, please. I just want to get through some specific things before time. We have 5 more minutes. There's some really interesting things happening within social connection interventions that are all aligned with policy and lit, and I really want to make sure that you all get your eyes on them. So one of them is something called a social, this is when it comes to programs for social connection, things get a little interesting. So one is the socially assistive robot. So the best example of this that we have in this field is something called Paro, which is a robot baby seal that is actually reimbursable through Medicare. And it's
oh my God.
I know. So social robots are socially assisted robots, support the social and psychological needs of the elderly. They serve multiple functions such as effective therapy, cognitive training, social facilitator, companionship, and physiologic therapy, and they are reimbursable through.
No.
So does Medicare pay for the dog that I have to have?
Well, I know this is the reason why they're aligned with Medicare is because the evidence of their efficacy is really quite profound.
Okay, we need to start doing studies on my dog, like ASAP. I'm sorry, some of these social robots are mildly creepy.
I know. I hear you. I hear you. But okay, I know. Okay, but then it gets weirder. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. Okay, so sorry, no judgment. My cat offers very good company, Mike. So the next is tech-enabled social connection device. So these are kind of very simplified systems that allow isolated elders to connect with their loved ones and families. There's specific interventions that basically, it's like if FaceTime was a thing, you just pressed a button and somebody was there. So you can be basically together virtually. So this is, again, all we did right now is separate out the different types of things. Whether or not they all need to be built, we can figure out over time. Of course, my chickens. The next one is a loneliness AI application, and I have to say, I have been asked personally to assist on so many of these app developers, and I don't even know why. I get asked about this all the time. So these are programs that simulate and process human conversations. They're specifically for elders, where you are talking to somebody that's talking to an AI-enabled bot that simulates real conversation. And there's actually a lot of evidence that it addresses the feeling of loneliness because you have the perception that you are not alone.
So there are movies.
I know. We talked about these movies. We did Her. We talked about it.
I mean, this is surreal.
I know, but some people.
Is everyone on this call okay with substituting battery charged seals?
So Lucy, though, that's not the question. The question is that, I mean, it's like ideally, there's the ideal, and there's like in the meantime, this is actually something that's helping people. We can say it's sad, but it works, right? And so if there wasn't, again, we are evidence-driven people, right? And so the literature says that these things help people, which is, I mean, the team can testify. I'm like, oh my Lord, I just want to hug everybody, right? I want to bring you a bowl of like like my tomatoes from the garden and sit with you and make a pie. And I wish I could do that with everybody, but I can't, right? So this is the first step.
Sarah?
Yes.
This is Carrie. As a person who has a kid who is kind of on the autism spectrum.
Yes, there we go. Yeah.
Yeah. I can see how my son could benefit from this, especially given the conversation we had last night about interpersonal relations with girls. He's a teenage boy.
Yeah.
And it's very embarrassing and hard for him. And I can see where this would have applicability for certain people. I don't.
It's really, we have to be
we're
careful
saying
not
that
to impart our biases and have an ableist perspective 100%. I agree. And even the social anxiety, right? If you, and
yeah, that's,
yeah,
that's,
yes.
and I think we're not suggesting this as a problem that will solve everything for everybody, but as a specific thing for certain people.
Yes.
Is
Yes.
how I'm reading.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah. This is Catherine Stiles at Adventist Health Simi Valley. We have a caregiver support program that is the result of realizing that 30.9% of our population are operating as unpaid family-based caregivers. And during COVID 2020, a lot of the support that we offer them disappeared. And so personally, I'm going to add this. I didn't know about this. I'm going to put this into our program to make sure that they are getting referred to get these things, because I do think these tools would have been effective for us through the pandemic, because we didn't have a lot to offer people in their homes, and they, even home health workers were not very welcome in the home. So this could be really good to know about, and I appreciate it coming forward. And yes, I think it's got a lot of dimensions to it, but absolutely better than nothing.
Correct. Yeah, and so I think it's important that we all have different communication styles. We all have different tolerances. We all have different expectations. And so, again, this is all evidence-based. I think it's so we can carry forward. There's another page. Are we ready? Next slide before we go. It's already overdue. So I just wanted to highlight a few last things. So one is social connection warm lines. Example, the Institute of Aging Friendship Line was a national line. Social skills building programs. There's lots of literature regarding these as well. These both happen with AI and with humans in place, but there's specific programs that are literally just a bot teaching you how to talk and communicate. They're specifically useful for elders who have lost a dear loved one and were so patterned in that pattern of communication that they're having a hard time figuring out how to talk to other folks. Social groups, and then we have all the different therapies: art therapy, music therapy, dance therapy, group exercise, and of course all the home and congregate meals come in too. So Meals on Wheels, home delivered meals, congregate meals, etc. Yes. So yeah, so we did we didn't put them on here, but all of those the adult care terms that we had on unemployment will come here as well. I think that's it. I think I went over time. Next slide, please. You can see there's a lot to review. Oh my gosh, elder abuse. Quick one. I want to focus on one slide. Next. The only thing I wanted to state very clearly before we go is we're working with David Burns on discrete, who's one of the researchers, because he really has developed a whole approach to discrete goal statements and application-enabled goal assessment using the goal attainment scaling, and it's implemented all across the Northeast and Southern Canada. So those goals terms will come in very shortly. This is all focused on elder abuse and really specific action steps towards meeting patients' needs based on qualitative literature from the patients themselves. Whew. Okay, next slide, and I think we're done. That was it. We're going to keep on going. You'll see this next time. You'll see this on the, I don't want to take you through. No tech update. Oh my Lord, we used all that time. Thank you so much. Review the masters on the Confluence. Thank you all for your engagement, and we appreciate all of you. Whew. And we do. This is our social connection intervention. Each other. Every other Thursday at 4 EST. Thank you so much.
So Sarah,
Thank
next
you,
time
Sarah.
we'll start with the iRobot.
Yes, I know.
Thank you.
Homework is due as soon as you can get it in, Cheyenne, because if there's any edits necessary to specifically the employment and education sets, We need to get that addressed ASAP so we can get folks' eyes on the edits. All right.
Thank you. Bye all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Hey, Sarah, do you hear me now?
I can. Hi, Charles.
Hi, finally. Hi.
I know. How are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. Excited to